Hey there, and welcome to Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent, the Lumina Foundation podcast with newsmakers and thought leaders in the field of learning and training after high school. I'm your host, Dakota Palicki, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. Innovation and originality are two buzzwords that are easy to find. Yet, despite their prevalence in the field of higher education, we often struggle to find those truly innovative ideas that can improve student outcomes. On today's show, we have three very different conversations about innovation in higher education. Each one is unique, goes deeply into the practical and philosophical elements of innovation, and help us understand what it looks like and how institutions can build cultures leading to greater innovation. Today's episode is a bit longer than usual. It was really tempting to try to edit this down, but honestly, each conversation is deep and meaningful. And so on the front end, I just want to encourage you, the listener, to listen to each guest, even if it means listening to each segment individually. While the show works well together, each guest goes deeply into their experience and expertise. I especially don't want you to miss out on our second and third segments, which are incredibly strong and interesting conversations. Later in the show, we're going to hear from Dr. David Wilson, president of Morgan State University, about how he has created a campus climate focused on innovation that has led to better outcomes for students. We also talk with journalist Paul Fain about the thousand lights of innovation happening around the country, going beyond the headlines and finding places we can all learn from. To get us started, I spoke with Professor Youngbuk Hong from the Heron School of Art and Design. As a scholar in design thinking, she introduces us to the concepts of innovation and originality and reflects on her own experience leading innovation efforts as a faculty member. Let's get started. Well, Professor Hong, thanks so much for joining us today. Maybe just starting out, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Youngbuk Hong. I'm a professor and graduate program director in Visual Communication Design Department at Heron School of Art and Design at IUPUI. It's a long title.
That is a good long title, but long titles are always fun ones. And I know I got a chance to meet with you because, I took a course of yours and you really kind of taught me a whole lot about some of the conversations we're talking about today. And so, as we discussed, today's large concepts, we're really just talking about innovation and originality. And I think for a lot of folks, those are words that we might kind of right click on a thesaurus and swap them out with words like new and, technology. But, I wanted to hear it direct from a scholar who knows and studies this quite a bit. As you think about those words, can you help us define what we mean by innovation and originality?
Yeah, again, these are really kind of big topics, right? We can spend hours and hours to talk about it. So the word originality and innovation definitely, carries some history. For instance, like originality. What's the definition of originality? Originality mostly associated with like the quality, the belonging to individual. For instance, like originality, extended definition of a creativity has been regarded kind of like, personal capacity or gift. So if you look for historical definition of it, originality has been regarded as a like special gift or ability belong to individual. So, when I go to my the workplace, Heron School of Art and Design, the definition of originality, it's more like artistic kind of ability. It's like ability to create something new, newness, novelty. Interestingly, I'm teaching the design thinking in visual communication design. So in our discipline, under the same roof, Heron School of Art and Design, we are not talking about originality that much. Instead, we're talking about innovation. So what does it mean, innovations? So obviously, the word innovation has, again, history. So many times we kind of confuse the word of innovation with inventions, meaning originate from the, industrial ages, revolution. We tend to kind of, mix two words between innovation and intervention. Intervention usually meaning technical interventions. But looking at all the literatures, innovation in the contemporary the context, we're talking about innovation as a more like constructive changes in the system. That's broader than technical intervention. So yeah, this is how I differentiate it. And also, I've been personally really interested in how these words evolve throughout the history. So originality from like individual gifted ability from Romanticism ages to interventions in industrial ages, and innovation as a the positive but constructive changes in the system in 21st century. So they all connected each other, but carries very specific contextual meaning throughout the history.
So kind of two things that I'm hearing you say there is, one is that both of these kinds of concepts and their definitions, maybe change and adjust as we progress through time. And so each kind of individual time period, whether it be the Romantic time period or the Industrial Revolution, kind of makes their own or applies those terminologies and concepts within the context of that time period. But then the second kind of thing I've heard you talk about here is that both terms apply to the specific context. And so when we think about originality in the context of an individual, we might be thinking about the unique gifts and assets that that person may have, possess, bring, develop. But originality might also then be applied to an institutional context. Is that right? And can we apply those concepts to an institutional concept?
Yeah, institutional, I would say system level. I would say. So, I mean, like, for instance, don't we have some cultural symbolic images, representing each word, like originality, creativity, like with artist, artist as a kind of symbolic images representing the concept, and interventions like, the people with some technological capacity, scientists in the lab, versus innovation in 21st century. Yes, that's a beyond, disciplinary based definition to me. It's more about system level changes.
And so, for the context of this show, we've talked about how, what I'm hoping to do is that, show that innovation doesn't have to mean technology. And so I kind of hear you also alluding to that maybe our strong association between those two is a result of being in the 21st century, where we're making lots of technological advances, but the concept of innovation can be more widely applied to non-technological based interventions. Is that right?
So yeah, that's how I differentiate between the words interventions, right? Intervention versus innovation. Those are two different things. But we kind of tend to like mix and, interchangeably use those terms.
Yeah. And sometimes that's at the detriment of perhaps identifying or working on new innovative things.
Yeah. And, we talked about the word of innovation as a buzzword across the sectors beyond the technological sectors, right? The social public sectors, and innovation is a huge word right now. But what it means, innovation and the social sector versus business sectors, they mean different things, right?
Absolutely. And, earlier you mentioned creativity, and I kind of want to bring that in briefly. There was a quote that you had introduced me to through some of our readings from Dr. Edward de Bono. He says that being different for the sake of being different is not creative. Creativity must add value. So how does the idea of adding value relate to innovation, for example?
When we define innovation as a positive or constructive changes in the system, there's a social aspect, meaning, original. So for instance, like people tend to say, oh yeah, she or he is an original thinker. What does it mean? Like, of course, that definition would be various according to the situation. But again, just using artist or art practice an example in my domain. Yeah, when we say, oh, that artwork is very original, that means that there's a, the implication about novelty, very unique, the concept or ideas from individual perspective. But when we're talking about innovation, there must be a consensus. There must be a established consensus about the value to a certain ideas. So it's not good enough to say, yeah, this is a new idea. That newness is now a critical component to define the value of innovation. There must be the meaningful consensus, the value what is that? Established among the stakeholders or the people within that specific problem space. Did I answer to your questions?
So yeah, I do think that you've answered your question, and I just need to make a little bit of meaning out of this. And I tend to think a lot in terms of stories and contexts and all that. So if what I'm hearing you saying is that that let's just say we're going to work on a problem. For us, it's going to be around, let's say an institution wants to increase the number of students that are graduating. And so they bring together the stakeholders, maybe departments and faculty and student success services all together, and they create a meaningful kind of definition of what value would be. And then through there, we're able to work together to find innovative solutions.
Yes.
But I have to respond to that kind of consensus building, and that consensus is built by those stakeholders. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So do you remember? So when we're talking about what is a criteria to define this as an innovative idea in design thinking specifically, we're not talking about novelty. We're talking about appropriateness. So that's a very different way to look at the definition of innovation, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. It doesn't have to be always a novel or new things. It is about social contract or socially appropriate. People will see the value collectively, right? Because at the end, there must be actions which will impact the system level changes. I mean, in that sense, it's so fundamental to have an established share the definition of this value, and then people can move to the next step. That's a very different definition of creative. I'm talking about I'm just taking the art as an example because that's my area too. So in art representing kind of traditional sense creative domain, it is more artistic individual practice. Artist doesn't need to really seek consensus. She or he's supposed to come up with a different way of looking at the world from her or his point of view, and then impact people's understanding about the world. That's very different when we talk about innovation in contemporary context. Why are we talking about innovation? At the end, we wanted to come up with the intervention, whatever solution to make our life better. It's very purpose-driven way of thinking we're talking about. In that sense, it is so fundamental conditions to have a consensus within the people situated in the shared problem space.
Mm-hmm. And so you touched on appropriateness, and we have also discussed at times other criteria that might create a framework to help understand what would be eventually a innovative intervention or policy or program or solution or action, whatever the insert thing might be, whatever the what might be. So you've talked about appropriateness, but I know you've also, in some of your other work, have talked about usability, usefulness. What are some common criteria that you have seen being used or developed by these consensus of stakeholders to better understand what value will be or what an innovative idea might be?
You might be familiar with a triangle. It's one of the criteria models popular in design thinking discourse: desirability, viability, feasibility. Mm-hmm. So, that's a very different criteria. So if you really carefully analyze, what are these ultimately? You will see there's a very specific point of view, business perspective, viability, feasibility. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's more kind of product-oriented innovations perspective in defining the criteria. But let's say if we're talking about community building, responding to social issues, social problem, the criteria should be defined within the context. There is no shouldn't be prescribed, the criteria to make a decision as a group. Instead, we're talking about the baseline criteria, which is about people. Who the people we're talking about in this problem space? And who will be the benefactors for the potential solutions, right? So in that sense, desirability might be the baseline criteria for all kind of innovation we're talking about. Based upon it, there must be, different criteria defining this is a solution serving for people you define in the problem context.
Mm-hmm. So as you go out and maybe offer practical advice to teams of people working on different challenges in different contexts, and they want to use a design thinking kind of methodology to develop some kind of innovative solution to a complex challenge. You're saying a little bit that, desirability is one maybe foundational criteria, and that those consensus of, and that those consensus of stakeholders then need to establish other additional criteria that are adjacent to their problem area. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes. I mean, desirability, it is a specific criteria representing what? Users' perspectives. Again, you've seen, I hesitant to use the word of users, calling people, depending on their role in the context. They could be user, customers, patient, students, residents, right? They're all different names, we can call people within the specific problem space. But whatever the name we call them, when we're talking innovation, specifically in contemporary context, we really kind of seriously looking at the desirability, what people desire, and how to align the resources and efforts to support for that desirability, right? But again, at the same time, we cannot only look at the desirability of the people in order to make our practice organizational sustainable. That means what are the criteria we should look at? But again, yes, those additional criteria should be defined, like what's the purpose of endeavors? What's the ultimate aim of the problem solving in this specific situation will give you, the definition of criteria. So, this is another thing, like, remember the converging and diverging, the concept of converging, diverging. So yes, when we're talking about problem solving, they're all different people from a different background, like collaboration, interdisciplinary, that's another buzzword. But let's say me as a faculty member, I don't own students' perspectives. And I might have a common interest with my students. Also, me as a part of the larger system, I carry different interests too. Then when we have the conflicts of interest, how are we going to make a decision? How are we going to make a decision? It is about, to me, it's so critical to define the criteria for decision making as a group, collectively. That seems really important. So, for instance, in our culture, people almost think ideating as what? Identical terms with brainstorming. But as I discussed in our class, no, brainstorming is one specific technique to generate the ideas. The more important thing is, yes, generate the ideas, but at the same time, diverging, we also need to converge, conceptualize the idea into some meaningful meanings. So what's the between the diverging, converging? It's a criteria, right? In the process of defining the criteria, we can coordinate our perspectives, values, and interests. Thus, people can make a more collective decision, democratic decision. That's how I really emphasize in my class. Yes.
Well, this is really helpful and very interesting. I think tees up our other segments very well. While I have you, you mentioned, you are a faculty member, you are teaching courses, and so as you think about your role as a faculty member, and, we talk a lot about what it means for students to succeed in higher education. Yes. Do you feel like, I don't know, are we being innovative? Are we going through the process and involving the stakeholders we need to be? In terms of identifying new, innovative, value-added ways to make sure students can succeed?
There's a University Innovation Fellow programs initiated at Stanford University. And I've been a faculty champion. They call me as a champion. So faculty champion IUP campus. So it's kind of creating the student organizations to bring their voices in any kinds of decision-making process. So I've been supervising the student group over 5 years or 3 years. I don't remember well. Anyhow, I had a very interesting experience. Heron, as part of the IUPUI, we have our own the resources in terms of defining what it means, like how to prepare our students, as an innovative thinkers with an art and design school. We have our assets. Heron is one of kinds of colleges in the IUPUI. You can think of the numbers of resources and assets belong to each school. Mm-hmm. So when I create this student group and they conducted research, what do they mean innovation, in their college learning? What are the resources they need? Yes, it was quite eye-opening experience.
What did you learn?
Because again, the silo, we're talking about silo, right? We were looking at, this is our definition of innovation, innovation, art and design practice versus innovation in SPIA, innovation, School of Nursing, innovation, School of Engineering. They have a radically different definition about it, right? So at the end, they conducted the research with me, the surveying, the inventory of the resource at the university, how we operating each resources at each school level. After surveying all this information, students come up with integrative solutions. So numbers of solutions they mentioned about like common space. The common space, they can hang around together and they can exchange knowledges, opinions together. And they were talking about the curriculum revisions, like university-wide curriculums. So again, like in their perspective, again, the same concept, they are the ultimate users of a higher education service, right? Mm-hmm. But many times we ask them, but how to ask them is a slightly different from what we do in my class. In other words, like survey is one way of knowing, isn't it? But your questions already crafted from your perspectives. But, like when I ask my students, be in the situation, actually, conduct the field work, interviewing, observing students across the building, they brought a very different understanding about how our university approaches and operating the concept of innovation. So integration, diversity, integration, those are two different kind of words at the same time, very closely linked concepts to me.
Yeah. And certainly, to your point, data collection is not the same as stakeholder engagement.
No, that's very different, right?
Right. Yeah. So, and kind of what I hear you saying is that, sure, as we talked about at the beginning, the kind of the definitions of the concept of innovation, for example, has to be contextually appropriate to the issue area. But in the instance of a higher education institution where there are multiple colleges or schools that are slightly different contexts in terms of the content they teach and their specific goals, we also have the same goal of increasing, student success, of making sure students can enter our institution, get a high quality education and leave with a credential. So there's an element of an integrated goal and an integrated definition of innovation that then also needs to be contextualized within the different silos of an institution.
Totally. This is part of the conversation you and I shared during the class last time, like, people, the definition of people in the problem context, right? Who we're talking about. So like me as a faculty member as the same time administrator, and, as part of the Heron, I have a multi-layered perspective and interest. So when we have a meeting, like people like me with like 15 or 18 schools all together, we have our own perspective. So what's the best way for us to really kind of like coordinating our perspective interest? Baseline perspective, students. Yeah. Who are we serving ultimately? Like, it's not for Heron students, it's not for engineering students. We're talking about students at IUPUI. So the baseline perspective is extremely important for us to not just like, verbally saying we collaborate with each other. That should be a baseline perspective. We can actually coordinate our interests as well as define the criteria.
Wow. Well, Professor Hong, this has been wonderful. Thanks for spending so much time with me. This has gone further than I expected it to, but I love where we went. And thanks for sharing your thoughts and your expertise and perspective with us today.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. Yeah, it was a
Yeah,
pleasure to talk with you. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch up soon.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk to you later. Yeah.
Okay.
Have a good summer.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome back. My next guest is Paul Fain, journalist and analyst in higher education and workforce issues. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Dakota. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're talking about innovation in higher education today. You've been a reporter and editor for Inside Higher Ed. You've been with the Chronicle of Higher Ed. You have a really fantastic newsletter with Open Campus called The Job. So you know the place and the space that we're talking about really well. You know, through all your reporting, how do you define or see innovation in higher ed?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting time to be asked that question, as I'm calling it the great reconnection, where folks are going back to work, seeing people in person again, thinking about whether or not they want to continue doing online education or hybrid. So a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities, frankly, in the next few months. So to me, innovation is generally should be and is these days around trying to better serve students who need the most help. And there are a lot of them right now, as the pandemic showed. And higher ed is losing students. Community colleges down 10% this spring, following 10% in the fall. So a lot of need there to do better, to meet students where they are. And for me, the innovators in higher education were already working on new ways to deliver their content and to provide value for students before the pandemic. It just accelerated that work. It moved the timeline up, and it made the need more obvious.
Absolutely. And so as you think about some examples, I mean, obviously, we think about innovation a lot in the technology space, and that's a little bit about what you're talking about here, about finding new ways of delivery of instruction in particular. But we also know innovation can be applied more broadly as a concept outside of technology. And, there's a lot of individual policies and practices that are also innovative towards student success. Are any good examples that you can think of that might be instructive to where we are in our current time?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think we focus a lot on technology, ed tech, in thinking about innovation. And when we think about the barriers that prevent student success, it's often money, which is obviously a barrier. But I think the pandemic showed that some of the more subtle problems are just as serious. Time, students just not having enough time, getting pulled on every direction, whether it's taking care of children or parents, working. So innovation that deals with that, to me, is as important as technology. I think, and related to that, the kind of wraparound supports. How do you help students with things like anxiety, uncertainty about the job market, the kind of online coaching that we know works? How do you do that at scale, but do it when you don't have a lot of resources? The institutions that serve students who need the most help don't have a lot of resources. So in that space, I see a lot of working with intermediaries, third parties like Merit America or Generation USA, organizations that know how to work with low-income students and pair up with colleges on degree programs to help those students get to the finish line.
As a journalist, I got to imagine that you not only come across, but are likely pitched a lot of ideas and stories and folks that are saying, hey, we're doing something really innovative here, or here's a real innovative leader. What do you look for in, your due diligence and your reporting process to really determine if something is truly innovative, or if that's something that, was a kind of thesaurus, right click, change the word to innovative instead of just new?
Yeah, and it's a good question. It's changed. When I was at the Chronicle before the Great Recession, it was the news was slower. The problems felt less extreme if they weren't actually. That recession and the recovery turbocharged some of the equity issues in higher education and that this pandemic did even more so. I actually see a lot more coming across the transom that to me feels really innovative. Like, whoa, I've never seen anything like that before than I did even 6 months ago. The pace of change is really accelerated. One thing that's interesting to me about that, though, is I hear a lot. I was thinking about some specific examples, and they're often the type of institutions that you think of as being very innovative. Western Governors University in Southern New Hampshire, of course, Arizona State. I hear from them a lot. I see what they're doing. They have big scale. They have people who know how to move quickly. It's a little harder to know for the more rank and file institutions that serve most Americans, what's really innovative in those spaces. It doesn't come to me as often, and I have to really beat the bushes a bit more, but it's happening. And I know that, even small private institutions in rural locations are having to be innovative because they face real demographic challenges.
Why do you think it's harder for some of those institutions that are serving, the majority or the majority of Americans or many Americans? Why do you think it's harder for them to, get on your radar to share their stories about what they're doing to improve student success?
Yeah, well, there's 4,000 colleges out there, and community colleges, which are my main focus. I think they're called community colleges for a reason. And I think until, the last 5 years or so, maybe paid less attention to Washington, D.C., where I am, for good reason. They're focused on their local community, talking to a reporter who's on the national stage, just not a top priority. But I think now most community colleges realize they have to tell their story. There's that great line of, if you don't tell your story, fools gladly will, right? College leaders across the country have to get in the mix, have to talk about what they're doing, because this is a resource strained environment, and there's a lot of policies that can have a big impact on what they do. I had to be specific, Tarleton State University in Texas, southwest of Fort Worth. The president there reached out to me on Twitter, actually, and said, hey, I think we're doing some stuff you might find interesting. A different world, right? Where you have a university president reaching out to you on Twitter. I called him. We had a great chat. He talked a lot about how they're becoming a Hispanic serving institution. They're prioritizing transfer students, and I couldn't immediately think of how to write about that. And then yesterday, the National Student Clearinghouse released some new numbers on transfer in higher ed, and transfer rates are down among community colleges. They're slightly up at 4 years, but I thought, hey, this is a great chance to talk about what Tarleton State is doing. So I got it in my newsletter today.
That's great. And just, for the record, today's June 3rd. I know we're not going to come out until a little bit later. So want to make sure folks can not only get your really great newsletter, but also that NSC report. I think it's an interesting point, and I'm wondering, we always hear about like how social media has kind of helped democratize media in some ways, and you've kind of given one such example. Here is a direct line between maybe a historically overlooked institution in terms of mainstream public media, reaching out directly to an established reporter in the space, a journalist in the space. You mentioned earlier, though, like how do we do things at scale? And I'm wondering, how do we better help institutions that are doing innovation and innovative things to help prepare students for the future tell their story a little bit better? Because I think the fallacy, the danger that we're running here is that because we're not talking about these places as centers of innovation, that thus means that they must not be innovating. And I think that you and I both know that's not true.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm not just saying this because of the show that I'm on, but I think foundations like Lumina can really help there, bring the resources to bear to show examples of things that are working well that others need to pay attention to. And I think that's happening a lot more around the country. I think there's more hunger in higher ed to see what's working at other institutions and to try to copy it. People are less interested in reinventing the wheel, which, by the way, I think happened a lot in higher ed. I was often struck by I never know as much as the folks I'm talking to about their work. That's just the definition of being my type of journalist. But I was often struck at how little they knew about other institutions or other states. And that played to my advantage because that's why people read our stuff. But it's also a problem, frankly, particularly when the industry is buffeted by so many challenges. But somebody like me, the Community College Research Center at Columbia University just put out some fantastic resources about what kind of works with student success in anticipation of some new federal and state funding that's going to be likely coming. And among other things, I went through it and was like, never heard of that, never heard of that. Like, to me, it was just a gold mine of story ideas. And, I think that's one way to intermediaries, experts, well-resourced institutions. But another thing is, frankly, journalism is not doing well in this country. As you know, DC, New York, LA, you have a lot of journalists, you have a lot of folks who are having to leave the field around the country. And that's why I'm actually working to launch a new publication that will have reporters on the ground. I mean, you can never replace that. When I'm calling Tarleton State from DC, I don't get Texas. I don't really understand it. It really helps to have folks who know what's really novel and new in those places.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate you too, kind of calling out the role of a convener or the role of a connector, the role private philanthropy or philanthropy in general can play. As we're looking at recovery and a lot of activity coming out of the federal government as well as individual state governments, what opportunities are there not only for us to invest in innovative ideas and policies and practices, but also invest in the ability for places to talk about the things that they're doing so well, to make those connections so we can all move further and faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that you have to understand when you think about the role of philanthropy, and I know you know this, even JP Morgan or Gates, their money is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what the federal government spends on any of this. States too. So they are kind of like the tail that can help wag the dog and in a good way. By, like, let's say the Biden administration has proposed $62 billion of money tied to student success and completion. How do we help make sure that money gets used well? That's an enormous amount of money. That would be like GI Bill level when you put it with free community college and some of the other things on the table. And that's where I think, a Lumina Foundation, there is evidence about what works out there. There are experts who know how to do these things well, making sure that they are part of the conversation for policymakers and for practitioners so that we can get the most out of this investment for students.
Sticking with the federal investment there for just a minute, as you said, a proposed very large amount of money, infusion of cash. I know we've talked with some, experts and folks in the field that are concerned that institutions might just want to do some backfilling. Institutions were hit hard, with the pandemic. State budgets were hit hard, and so there is a concern that the dollars will be used to kind of backfill rather than drive us forward. From your perspective and from some of your reporting, do you feel like at the federal level we've done enough to make sure those dollars can be used to really drive us forward, to innovate in some ways, to respond to the challenges of today and tomorrow?
Yeah, I think we hopefully as a society have learned some lessons from previous crises. After the last recession, the Obama administration proposed $12 billion in new spending for community colleges. That ended up getting downgraded to about $2.5 billion. These were workforce-oriented grants. The TACT grants is like a 12-letter long acronym, by the way. But I think most people would agree it largely was backfilling. There was a lot of things that worked. Competency-based education at my hometown community college of Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio, absolutely. But largely, no. They weren't enduring partnerships that these grants went to. So how do you learn from that and make sure that it doesn't happen again? And again, I'm not saying it was wasted, but it probably wasn't used to really help students as much as it could have been. But, I think one of the problems that I worry about is how do we define success with any of this? This is hard work. Anyone who works in higher ed will tell you that. The completion rates, even of some of the top schools that serve low-income students, are not high. And, I think there's going to be a lot of failure. If you think about short-term Pell Grants. What is an acceptable level of success there? As of last week, these are 8 to 15 week programs that Pell, if passed, and it could happen next week, for the first time ever, would be able to subsidize. They actually added you have to at least prove that your average graduate gets a 20% wage bump. Those sort of guardrails and protections, I think, can go a long way to making sure that the money is used well.
That's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up. We were talking to, in our first segment, Professor Yongbuk Hung, who studies innovation, studies design thinking. And one of the things that she talked about, we got into the kind of criteria about what makes something actually innovative and what are the criteria. You've just mentioned some of the criteria, the criteria related specifically around the kind of student impacts that we want to see. And in this case, in the new proposed, opportunities here is about 20% wage premium. I guess I'm also curious, from your perspective, one of the things she talked about was desirability. Being an important part of innovation, that we can create something that's incredibly innovative, but if no one desires it, then is it really innovative or useful at that point, right? But applying that to our landscape, it can be difficult because we are in somewhat of a fractured space, particularly around higher ed, and higher ed has become, as you said, it used to be kind of a slow news beat, and now it certainly has picked up quite a bit. I think part of that has to be around desirability for what states and communities want out of their education system. How is that element coming into some of your reporting as you have gone around from state to state, community to community? I mean, are you really seeing the kind of different desires coming out from stakeholders about what they want out of the education system? And if so, are we really aligning to those kind of local things? Are we paving people over?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was thinking about some of the really innovative ideas that I've written about over the years that I look back and the company is gone. The enrollment numbers never were anything other than tiny, and look, that's going to happen with experimentation. But yeah, sometimes I think innovation has trumped realistic ideas about market and the needs that it will serve. And I'm a believer that, there are some giant scaled operations in higher ed that are very promising. And I feel like a broken record talking about Western Governors or Southern New Hampshire, but I mean, Arizona State, they show that at a national scale, you can do some different things. But for the most part, I feel like the most promising innovations that I write about are small. It's 1,000 points of light. It's an employer and a local community that works with a nonprofit, a community organization, and a community college to create a pathway for 40, 50 jobs. And, when I did a big landscape scan of kind of this alternative credential innovation pathways, maybe 3-4 years ago, a lot of the numbers I saw were in the dozens of these sort of programs, and that's okay. I will tell you, they're getting larger. Like now I'm hearing about local kind of collaboration between employers and higher ed where they have 5,000 students participating. And I think, if we see a big change in the way students are served, it's probably going to be that through just hundreds and thousands of experiments that work.
Mm-hmm. So as you've covered the variety of innovations, and I really appreciate what you've just said, that there are in these institutions that you've named here that are truly innovators, but they've also innovated by essentially breaking the model in a lot of ways, and that's my characterization. I'm not but to your point, there's a lot of other innovations that are happening almost on a daily basis. The 1,000 points of light that I think you said. And I'm curious from your perspective, as you've reported on these kinds of 1,000 light experiments, are there common characteristics of these institutions, of their leaders, of the resources they have, of anything that we could learn from to say, you know what, if you have these right mix of things, that at least creates a conducive environment to innovation? What are some of those characteristics that you've seen?
That is a really good question. When I was at the Chronicle, I covered the college presidency and finances. And it was a great primer to learn about higher ed and it's really complex business models and the way things work. And I will admit that I was a little bit of a skeptic of how important the leader is. I'm kind of a question authority sort of guy, like a lot of journalists. And, how important can a president of an institution that employs thousands of people really be? Well, a lot. Like, they set the tone, right? And I think one common theme I see, and, part of it is we always write about the same examples, but sometimes those examples really are outliers, like Georgia State and its achievement gap. I mean, they have done amazing things there. Valencia College, working with UCF in Orlando. And across all of those, you tend to see a college president who stayed a long time, like 10 plus years, and who made this like a priority across everything, how people's jobs are evaluated, how they do student success. Like, it's got to be that ingrained. And then the other thing is like meaningful. The piece that I'm focused on is labor market returns for innovation. And you just need that employer that's serious about this, that it's not just PR, that really wants to work with higher ed to do something different. And I think we're seeing more of those. I think a lot of it was more PR and like somebody in the C-suite getting a good idea that kind of died by the time it got actually to folks who are administering it. But now I think the problems of employers are serious enough that they are spending real money and effort to work with higher ed.
Mm-hmm. Paul, before we let you go, is there anything that you want to add that we haven't discussed yet?
Really good questions, and thanks for having me. I think the next few months are going to be absolutely fascinating and critical for higher education. I personally think that we're not going to go back to a status quo that is anything close to exactly like what it was before. And the pace of change is just going to keep happening because people's attitudes are going to be different coming out of this. And just one of the thoughts that just keeps hitting me is, we're seeing a lot of data now that shows that low-income folks are rethinking their lives, their careers, their education plans. And that makes sense. We've all been through a trauma of a pandemic. And I think higher education needs to really think about those, have good data about what people need and want to be able to meet them in this period of, I think, incredible change as folks reconnect.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. I love your newsletter, by the way. It was in my inbox this morning, so it was great to be able to read it before having a chance to talk with you. So make sure, where can people find that newsletter one more time?
Yeah, it's on the Open Campus Media website. The newsletter is called The Job, and we'll actually be having a sister publication called WorkShift going live in about 3 weeks.
Excellent. Well, perfect timing, because 3 weeks is about when this will be published, so it should be about ready now. So go check them out. Paul, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Dakota. Great questions.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You too.
Hello and welcome back. My next guest is Dr. David Wilson, president of Morgan State University. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, Dakota, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure being with you.
Yeah. So, as I've mentioned, today we're talking about innovation in higher education, and specifically the kind of concepts behind innovation and originality. Just to start, bring us into your world a little bit. How do you define or think about innovation at Morgan State?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about innovation, perhaps all the way back to the time that I was a boy growing up in rural Alabama, and I brought a little bit of that with me every step along the higher education journey. I grew up in abject poverty in Alabama, and we would have to make our own toys. And my father would, grow our own syrup, and we'll have these big buckets of syrup. And when we used all the syrup out of the buckets, I would basically be given the bucket, and I could go outside and fill it with dirt, and then take a clothes hanger and basically, put a hole on each end of the bucket and run it through, and I would make my Mattel toy. And I fell in love with the concept of innovation when I was about 5 or 6 years old, though I'm sure that word had not made its way into my lexicon. And so along the way, I have always stepped back and I have taken note of what I had at each institution that I have been fortunate to be a part of. And I've asked the big question, how do you take what you have and make what you need? And oftentimes that does not involve a huge infusion of money as the first option. It involves understanding the power of creativity, the power of taking whatever you have to make what you need and to make it better. And so that's the way that I have embraced innovation along the way. And that's the way that I see innovation here at Morgan. It is, what do we have here in our larger environment? We know we don't have everything that you will find on every other campus, but how do we take what we have and use our imagination, use our creativity, understand the needs of our students, understand the needs of our larger community, and then make what we need. And in the case of students, make it so extraordinarily well that once they embrace it, once they taste it, they're ready to dance on the world stage with the best of them, any place, anytime, anywhere.
That is such a strong statement and quote. Take what you have, make what you need. One of our earlier guests talked about the criteria that we use in defining innovation and coming up with new ideas. And so looking at the latter half of that statement of, make what you need, as you think about it in the context of student success, what do students need? What are we needing to make using what we have?
Yeah, and so first of all, from the standpoint of students, particularly students that we serve here at Morgan, who are dripping in brilliance, and so many of them don't know it. I think we have to create, first of all, a more welcoming environment, a more nurturing environment, a more supportive environment to bring out every ounce of brilliance that they possess unknowingly. And so we take what is in the larger environment and work with our students to make sure that they can make that better, and we can make it better in order to better serve their needs. Now, for example, in the area of making sure they have the appropriate resources to stay in school, we know that the university does not have enough money to reach into our coffers and to provide all of our students with all the money they need to stay on here in school. And we know that many of them don't have the fortunes to call home and say to their mom, dad, grandmom, grandfather, loved ones, I owe Morgan $5,000. And so can you put that on your American Express card? Some of the families don't have American Express cards. And so therefore, how do we take what we have, which is a parsimonious amount of resources, understand what the student needs, and then try and ensure that we are proportioning that in a way that's going to enable the student to stay on here at Morgan and persist to get their degree on the one hand, and then would not put the institution in a position where we cannot appropriately invest in the kind of programs, in the kind of quality instruction to enable them to have a high quality education when they cross the finish line. And so, sure enough, if we were an institution with a $5 billion endowment or so, and we may have access to money to acquire more tools and more bells and whistles, that certainly may be the first step that we would take. But no, we try and look at our resources and look at the needs of our students and basically come up to the line here and say, this is about as much as we can take from our coffers and allocate that to students to enable them not to drown in debt on the one hand and to be able to taste the magic of a Morgan College degree on the other. And Dakota, I tell you, that is just an incredible feeling when we're able to do that. And then 3, 4, 5 years later, we are on the stage here in our stadium, and we're seeing those young men and women come across the stage, some of them in tears, because they know that had we not been innovative in thought, and had we not created an environment of nurturing and welcoming, and had we not done those things, they would not be walking across that stage.
And clearly what you're doing is working very well. I mean, you've been the president of Morgan State for nearly 11 years. During that time, I'm just looking at some facts here. I mean, your second year retention rate is above 70% for 8 consecutive years. You have the highest graduation rate in 10 years at 43%. You've even elevated the institution from an R3 to an R2 research classification. So, clearly some of the ways that you are creating the kind of innovative environment at Morgan State are working pretty well. Give us a better understanding of what that environment is. What makes Morgan State so unique?
Well, actually, those statistics have improved just a little bit more. And so we're now in our 11th straight year of retention rates in the 70s. And when I arrived at Morgan a decade or so ago, it was in the 60s, and the graduation rate was in the high 20s. And we've been able to achieve a graduation rate here that's the highest in our history. And this past year, the second highest in our history. And that really has been done because we have just an incredibly impressive and talented team of professionals here at Morgan. We have a team in our enrollment management and student success area that calls themselves Team No Sleep, and trust me, they get no sleep. They have coined the phrase here of intrusive advising, and it is intrusive. They embrace our students almost like social workers. They literally go sometimes door to door in residential halls, knocking on doors. We haven't heard from you in 3 or 4 days. And those students come to understand that these individuals really do care about me. They care about my success. And so what sets Morgan apart from many institutions is that we just don't try and talk a good game here. But we try and play a good game and let others talk about it for us. And we're able to attract, I think, some of the most dedicated, skilled, and student-friendly professionals in the country. And they have long tenures here. And they have great relationships with our faculty. They work very, very closely with the faculty. And the faculty here, I hate to use the phraseology the faculty have bought into, but they've kind of really kind of embraced this notion that I'm not an effective instructor. Yeah, I do research, and yes, I do service, but I'm not an effective instructor if my students are not succeeding. And so they understand that a part of their satisfaction is ensuring that the students are able to stay here and get what they need in those classrooms. And so the faculty here at Morgan is 100% bought into student success. And that's a little bit unique than on some campuses in American higher education. You have to really kind of struggle in some places to maybe get everybody, marching down the field to the same beat. But Morgan is an institution that is just deeply rooted in taking students where they are and moving them where they need to be able to be successful both here at Morgan and years after they have left this institution.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of your faculty and staff, to continue your line of thought, have gone beyond just buying in to continue the conversation. They really believe, right? That's the next phase of buy-in is belief, authentic belief into the kind of work that you're doing there. That kind of cultural transformation is innovative of itself. And yet we know one of the driving forces behind any kind of cultural change at any organization of any size is its leadership. So I'm curious, talking to you, how do you see yourself? What is your role in kind of helping to steward, create, incentivize, whatever word you want to put in here, that kind of culture of not only belief into the mission, collegiality across, normally and historically siloed divisions, and as well as a culture of innovation?
Well, someone asked me this question the other day, and they asked me, well, what really sustains you in the presidency? And I thought about it, and I said, they asked me what sustains you in your job, the presidency. And I thought about it. And Dakota, what I know is that at Morgan, I don't have a job. I have a calling. And there's a difference. I have never worked a day in my life at this institution. It is an absolute joy to be what I call the first among equals, and to be in a position where I can go out into the nation, go around the world, to see what is around the corner, to see what is way ahead and bring it back to the institution, and to lay it in front of our faculty, our staff, our governing board, our alums, and say, here's what's happening out here on the horizon. You don't see it yet, but I do. And we collectively need to position ourselves in this institution to be in a position where when what I'm sensing is going to be seen by all, it would not be a surprise to any of us. And over the years, I must admit, I think there's been a lot of trust placed in our ability here to see the unseen and to position Morgan to not be surprised when it all of a sudden manifests itself in front of us. And so my role is to make sure that everyone at the institution is having a tomorrow that is different than yesterday. And when it gets to a point where basically day 1 is no different than day 15, and day 27 is no different than day 50, then the institution is stagnant and is not progressing. And so I try as a president to inspire, to motivate, to be visionary, to always try and be on the cutting edge of where I think higher education is, and to kind of play with some of the challenges that are in front of higher ed and how we position Morgan to wrestle successfully with those challenges.
I definitely want to get back to some of the challenges that you are seeing ahead, but my curiosity is really, I like to think about how we do things a lot rather than the what of what we do. And I'm curious, how do you go about your kind of forecasting work? What do you look for? What's your criteria to be able to see around the corner?
Well, I think the first is to always be open to deep listening, and when you are open to listening, when you are in environments and you're in conversations, things kind of reveal themselves to you, and I like to do a lot of listening. As opposed to just simply a lot of talking. And I've found that that's a great approach to cogitating on what is looming. people say some things in conversations that are just so original, that are so innovative. They haven't thought these things through, but they're on the cutting edge, and then they kind of let some of those very innovative thoughts go. And I try and kind of reflect on those a little bit more deeply and think about the possibilities. Also, I have always been a leader that valued diversity of everything, diversity of thought, diversity, obviously, in terms of demographics, in terms of racial diversity, gender diversity, international diversity, and have been fortunate, to really, literally travel around the world several times, and that has enabled me as well to not be susceptible, to shallow thinking, to really kind of understand the way things really work in other parts of this country and other parts of the world, and to incorporate some of that into our vision setting here at Morgan, and into the way we approach, the calling that we have, the work that we have undertaken, so to speak. And so I do think that, you have to kind of create an environment and climate on your campus, which I think we've done here, where people are also eager to continue to learn, to continue to grow, and others feel that they are a part of something as opposed to something that is merely tolerating them. And when you are able to pull all that together, you have an institution where everybody feels that they are under the umbrella. And even if it is raining really, really hard, that the umbrella will cover all of them and no one will get wet. And so I guess kind of philosophically, I know you're pushing for practicality as well, but philosophically, I think it has to start there with people being inspired and motivated by leadership, and they have to understand that there's a certain kind of expectation of them, and the expectation is that we are all committed, to the same thing, and ultimately that is the success of our students.
And it also seems to, at the very foundation, is a leader who's willing to listen and deeply listen, I think. And I think that makes a pretty substantial difference in creating the kind of climate that moves people from buy-in to belief, moves people into innovative, aligned ideas and strategies to meet common and shared goals. And to get to kind of your forecasting ability too, I'm curious to get in your head, what are some of the challenges that you see coming around the corner, especially as, we navigate, hopefully, a recovery and hopefully exiting COVID-19?
Well, I do think that one of the major challenges that we're going to see will really deal with the cost of acquiring a college degree. What COVID-19 has revealed all too clearly is we knew about economic inequities in this country. We knew about the wealth gap. But COVID has taken whatever sheet or blanket that we had over that and just pulled it back. And it is now, it's just naked. You can see it now in a way that perhaps many people did not see it or did not recognize it, or didn't want to beforehand. And so it is going to be very challenging for students who have to have a high quality credential beyond high school. And these are, Black students and brown students and students who are increasingly growing up in poor families, to be able to get that. If, for example, cost continues to be a barrier, And so we will have to figure out how we make college more affordable to the large swath of Americans that must obtain a high quality education if long term America is to maintain its competitiveness around the globe. And we need to sit down across everything and have what I call a genuine conversation and a genuine dialogue around this. I do applaud some of what I'm hearing coming out of the Biden administration about everything from how do we, forgive, if you will, some of the student loan debt to trying to, make college in some way more affordable to students who cannot afford it. If we don't think like this, Dakota, my greatest fear is that we could end up with a situation where only the wealthy in our country will be the most educated because they would be the ones who can send their sons and daughters to college. So I think that's a huge conundrum for us. And then just quickly in terms of another, I do think that we will have to now integrate technology. And I certainly embrace the notion that innovation is not exclusively about technology. However, one of the things that COVID brought upon the institutions overnight was this embrace of hybrid online, high flex instruction. And we had thousands and thousands and thousands of faculty members across the higher education landscape who had never taught an online course. And all of a sudden, that was the only mode of instruction available. And so they had to learn quickly. But in the process of doing that, we also had a number of students who had never taken online courses. And so we've been at this now for about a year and a half, several semesters, several quarters. And many students now have become comfortable with that modality. Many faculty members have become comfortable with that modality. And so I do think a challenge here is, so where do these two things meet? Face-to-face, online, and I do think that they're going to meet in a space prior to the pandemic, I believe was sort of new in higher ed, called high flex. And that is, of course, where you can live stream your classes. Students in residence would have the choice to decide on any given day when that class is offered, whether to trek across campus and physically be in the classroom or to take it via live stream. And so that's going to be something universities will have to figure out because, many of them will have to invest in upgrading classrooms in order to have this technology, which we're doing here at Morgan. We're spending, given our budget is significant. I think it's about $6 to $7 million to upgrade about 300 classrooms. But that's sort of just a couple of things that I see that we're going to have to pay some attention to, not just next year, but over the next several years.
As you think about the field of higher education overall and talking about the kinds of things that we need to do relatively quickly in order to address the challenges that are coming towards us, address the challenges that we're currently facing, particularly with enrollment and student success. Do you feel that higher education as a field is well suited to respond to this kind of challenge with innovation? And I'm kind of reminded of a show we did right when the pandemic first kind of early months. We talked to Commissioner Harrison Keller from Texas, who discussed how quickly and how similar to you, how positively shocked he was about, those are my words, not his, about the adoption of technology-based and delivery of instruction. And he said that he was hoping that this kind of proved a point that we could do this in other facets of higher ed to move further faster. So I guess I'm curious from your perspective, obviously Morgan State is poised and ready to go in a lot of these areas and clearly leading. Do you feel that higher ed overall is in that similar position, or do we have some substantial work to do within our own context to prepare for the challenges of tomorrow?
I think you're going to see pockets of higher ed move more quickly than others. And I think that will be driven by, stresses on enrollment. You want to help institutions to begin to reflect on that significantly. And if students are saying, well, you got to offer courses in this particular format, and if the institution is not doing that and students are walking away, then I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on institutions to embrace some innovation in this space that perhaps they have not done before. I think that you are going to see a significant amount of change in higher education over the next 5 to 7 years. I do think higher education is going to be more nimble. I think you're going to see more partnerships with the public and private sector with regard to career opportunities, career readiness. I think you're going to see a huge menu of different degrees, not just the traditional degrees that we are offering, because I think there will be more direct conversations with employers about the skills that they are looking for in newly minted college graduates, and perhaps they can't get all those skills in one discipline. And so I think you're going to see many more interdisciplinary degrees that will imbue students with a combination of technological savviness, global and cultural competence, and also an ability to rationalize and to engage in critical thinking and to work in teams and to really have no issues with others who are different than they are, be it a different color or a different gender. And so I do think you're going to see a plethora of new degrees that will make their way onto the higher education landscape that previously we had not seen in record numbers. Certainly we here at Morgan just 3 weeks ago brought to our board 18 new interdisciplinary degrees, 8 new degrees at the bachelor's level, 6, if you will, at the master's level, and 4, I believe, at the PhD level. And that was the result of our kind of understanding that we have to kind of pull together a number of disciplines and then understand the skills that are developed at the intersection of these disciplines. And I do think that perhaps you will see more degrees like that coming out of a different type of institution post-COVID.
Dr. Wilson, before I let you go, what are you most hopeful for in higher education for our country?
Morgan State University is an institution that prides itself on producing students in all fields, but particularly in STEM fields, where we know there's a huge underrepresentation of students of color. So we're number 1 in the US in producing Black electrical engineers. We're number 1 in civil. We're number 2 in industrial. The last we looked, I think we're number 4 in producing Blacks in engineering in all fields. We have about 20 disciplines here at Morgan where we're in the top 20 in the United States in producing Blacks in all of those fields. And so what I guess I'm saying here is that for an institution like Morgan, and we have several that have been doing this for over a century and a half, we know what it takes. We know what it takes to produce the type of talent that this nation will need to diversify its workforce and to enable those individuals to become the innovators of the future, to become the inventors, to become the individuals who have the patents, who are finding a cure for the viruses, ending pandemics, and so. What makes the American system of higher education so unique in the world is the diversity of its institutions. And I certainly hope that we never lose that, that you have this incredible choice of places in the United States that you can go to prepare you to be competitive, be it a 2-year institution, be it a comprehensive master's level institution, a PhD institution, a historically Black college, a tribal serving institution, a Hispanic serving institution, an Ivy League institution. I mean, it's a great, great diversity of institutions that has defined this country, and I hope we never lose that.
So I think it's a great and strong point to finish on, and certainly as you've noted throughout, the idea of diversity of thought, diversity of people, diversity of place, and now diversity of opportunity. It can certainly lead to a stronger country and a more creative thought. And I go back down to your, where you began about kind of creating your own toys and all of that, and that's what we all have the opportunity to do. And clearly, students who are leaving an institution like Morgan, who has ingrained the ideals of innovation at such a base foundational cultural level, I'm sure that's being incubated inside of them as they go out and enter the workforce as well.
Absolutely. And we have a very strong student innovation club here. Of course, we have just scores of university innovation fellows, that national program that came into existence a few years ago. Our students are very competitive, and they are selected. They go out to Stanford University for a couple of weeks and begin to understand the ecosystem around innovation. And they've come back and they've presented some powerful ideas to us about ideation spaces on campus and ideation labs, and how they could get together at any given point on campus with students across a number of disciplines and create something anew, just based on the power of an idea. And that is just so incredible to watch as I walk the campus and I see these students engage in this animated conversation around some concept. And I stop always to Dakota and I look in and I try not to interrupt, and they kind of feel me there, so to speak, my presence. And then when they're done and I ask them to introduce themselves, well, you may have 2 engineers there, you may have a philosophy major, and then you may have a history major, and then you may have a chemistry major and a business major, and they are really, really talking about the big issues of today and how they need to be thinking about them and starting new entities and new social investment opportunities. And it's really, just a thrill to be a part of that and to see all this brilliance come to fruition.
It's very clear to me why you feel like you've never worked a day at Morgan State. That sounds like an incredibly rewarding experience.
It's almost like you doing these podcasts. I'm sure you never worked a day as well, because this is something you do very well.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. It's very kind. Well, Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for your time today, your thoughts today. I really always enjoy having a chance to talk and learn and hear from you. And thank you for spending some time sharing what you've been thinking about with our audience today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having me. And I hope this was helpful in some way.
Very much so. All right. Be well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Take care.
Our guests today leave us with a lot to process. For me, I'm walking away thinking about 3 main points. Professor Hong tells us that innovation is partially defined by context, and that context is created by the consensus of people close to the issue area. In other words, we can only be innovative if we work together to define value and co-create solutions. Second, while we hear about large examples like Southern New Hampshire University and Western Governors University, Paul Fain reminds us that there are 1,000 lights that also exist in the institutions that serve the vast majority of America. We need to get better at seeing these lights and supporting those places, people, and ideas that bring innovation to our own backyard. And finally, leadership and culture matter. Dr. Wilson's example shows us that deep listening, creating relationships across silos using shared goals, and ultimately using what you have to build what you need is a recipe for innovation and success. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for spending some time with us. My thanks to our guests, Professor Young-Bok Hong, Paul Feng, and Dr. David Wilson. Our show is produced by John Strauss, Jacob Mann, Catherine Weedle, and me, Dakota Pilecki, with support from Matthew Jenkins, Mark Allen, and the team at Site Strategics. Well Done Marketing supports the promotion of our show. Deborah Humphreys and Kevin Corcoran provide leadership for Lumina's strategic engagement efforts. Be sure to subscribe and rate our show wherever you're getting your podcast. And if you are still listening at this point and you have yet to subscribe, I don't know what you're waiting for. Help us out by subscribing and rating our show. If you have a comment or an idea for an episode, reach us at luminafoundation.org or reach me on Twitter at Dakota Pilecki. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time.